The profound loneliness of being a deep thinker begins not with rejection, but with the simple act of opening one's mouth to speak. Words that seem crystal clear in the vast landscape of your mind emerge into the world only to be met with blank stares, confused expressions, or worse, confident misinterpretations that bear no resemblance to your intended meaning. This is the curse of depth, possessing a mind that operates on multiple levels simultaneously while trying to communicate with those who navigate only the surface. Freud understood this isolation intimately when he wrote, "The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water." For deep thinkers, this metaphor takes on painful relevance. While most people communicate from that visible seventh, deep thinkers draw from the submerged depths, bringing up insights that have traveled through layers of unconscious processing, symbolic thinking, and interconnected understanding. The result is communication that feels natural to them, but appears incomprehensible or unnecessarily complex to others. Consider how a deep thinker processes even simple interactions. Where others might see a casual conversation about the weather, the deep thinker simultaneously perceives the speaker's underlying anxiety, the cultural conditioning that makes weather a safe topic, the existential avoidance embedded in small talk, and the poignant human need for connection despite our inability to express it directly. This multi-layered perception happens automatically, creating a response that addresses not just the surface question, but the entire emotional and psychological ecosystem surrounding it. The complexity doesn't arise from a desire to be difficult or superior. Rather, it emerges from an inability to turn off the depth perception. Deep thinkers cannot unsee the patterns they perceive, cannot unfeel the undercurrents they sense, cannot unknow the connections they've made. They speak from this place of integrated understanding, forgetting that others may not have taken the same journey through the depths to arrive at comprehension. This creates a peculiar form of intellectual isolation. The deep thinker learns through repeated experience that their natural mode of expression alienates others. They watch as their carefully nuanced observations are reduced to simple binaries, their paradoxical truths flattened into one-dimensional statements, their systemic insights dismissed as overcomplication. The very richness of their perception becomes a barrier to being perceived accurately by others. The curse intensifies when deep thinkers attempt to simplify their communication. In trying to translate their multidimensional understanding into linear language, something essential is always lost. It's like trying to describe a symphony using only single notes, or explaining the ocean to someone who has only known puddles. The translation process itself becomes a source of frustration, as they watch their profound insights reduced to platitudes that capture none of the original meaning's depth or nuance. Many deep thinkers develop what could be called linguistic loneliness, the exhausting experience of never quite being able to convey what they actually mean. They become trapped between two impossible choices: speak authentically and be misunderstood, or simplify their truth and feel the pain of self-betrayal. Neither option provides the connection and understanding they crave. This communication gap often leads to social misunderstandings. Deep thinkers are labeled as pretentious when they're simply being precise, accused of overcomplicating when they're attempting to honor complexity, dismissed as impractical when they're seeing long-term patterns invisible to others. Their gift for depth becomes reframed as a social liability, their capacity for nuanced thinking treated as an inability to grasp simple concepts. The irony is that deep thinkers often understand simple concepts perfectly well. They simply cannot stop at the simple when they can see how it connects to everything else. Their minds automatically weave individual threads into larger tapestries, trace effects back to causes, project current patterns into future possibilities. What appears as unnecessary complexity to others is simply their natural way of perceiving reality. Freud himself experienced this curse throughout his career, writing ideas that seemed outrageously complex to his contemporaries, but now form the foundation of psychological understanding. He noted that the voice of the intellect is a soft one, but it does not rest until it has gained a hearing. This patience becomes essential for deep thinkers who must wait, sometimes for years or decades, for others to catch up to insights that seemed obvious from the beginning. Deep thinkers often serve as unwitting oracles, giving voice to truths that lurk in the collective unconscious but remain carefully unspoken in polite society. They possess an unsettling ability to articulate what everyone senses but no one wants to acknowledge, becoming channels through which repressed realities force their way into consciousness. This gift for speaking the unspeakable explains why deep thinkers are not merely misunderstood, but actively resisted, their insights triggering defensive reactions far out of proportion to mere intellectual disagreement. Freud recognized this phenomenon when he observed that no one who, like me, conjures up the most evil of those half-tamed demons that inhabit the human breast and seeks to wrestle with them, can expect to come through the struggle unscathed. Deep thinkers, whether they intend to or not, conjure these demons simply by refusing to participate in collective denial. They see through the comfortable lies that societies construct to avoid facing uncomfortable truths about human nature, power dynamics, and existential realities. The unconscious material that deep thinkers channel often relates to society's shadow, those aspects of collective human experience that have been relegated to darkness. They might speak casually about death in a culture that pretends mortality doesn't exist. They might acknowledge the self-serving motivations behind apparent altruism. They might point out the violence underlying systems that present themselves as peaceful. These observations, drawn from the depths of psychological understanding, feel like attacks to those invested in maintaining surface illusions. This channeling happens not through mystical means, but through a combination of heightened perception and reduced psychological defenses. Where most people have learned to filter their awareness to exclude disturbing insights, deep thinkers remain permeable to the full spectrum of human reality. They haven't developed the same protective blindness that allows others to function comfortably within systems of denial. Their minds remain open channels through which unconscious truths can surface. The reaction to these channeled truths follows predictable patterns. First comes the sharp intake of breath, the momentary recognition that something true has been spoken. This is immediately followed by denial, anger, or dismissal. The deep thinker is labeled negative, pessimistic, or destructive. They're accused of creating problems where none existed, when in reality they've simply named problems everyone was collectively ignoring. The messenger becomes the target because the message itself is too threatening to engage with directly. Consider how deep thinkers often find themselves articulating the unspoken dynamics in families, organizations, or social groups. They might observe that a seemingly happy family is actually organized around one member's dysfunction. They might note that a company's stated values directly contradict its actual practices. They might point out that a social movement claiming to promote equality actually reinforces hierarchies. These observations, arising from an inability to not see patterns, make them dangerous to systems dependent on unconsciousness. The burden of channeling unconscious truths extends beyond social rejection. Deep thinkers often experience a peculiar form of psychological weight, the exhaustion of carrying awareness that others refuse to share. They become repositories for collective shadow material, holding truths that others have expelled from consciousness. This can lead to periods of intense isolation and even depression, as they struggle to process not only their own psychological material, but also the collective unconscious content they've absorbed. Freud understood that bringing unconscious material to consciousness was inherently destabilizing, noting that the ego is not master in its own house. When deep thinkers voice unconscious truths, they remind others of this fundamental lack of control, this presence of forces operating beneath the threshold of awareness. The reaction is often violent precisely because the truth threatens the ego's illusion of mastery. Yet this capacity to channel unconscious truths also explains why deep thinkers are essential to human progress. Every major advancement in human understanding has come through someone willing to speak truths that their contemporaries found unbearable. From Galileo's heliocentric model to Freud's own theories of the unconscious, progress requires voices willing to articulate what the collective is not yet ready to hear. The deep thinker's relationship with unconscious truth is complex and often painful. They cannot turn off their perception any more than they can stop breathing. They see the shadows others miss, hear the unspoken subtexts, feel the repressed emotions that saturate social spaces. Their choice is not whether to perceive these truths, but whether to speak them, knowing that doing so will likely result in misunderstanding, rejection, or attack. This dynamic creates a profound spiritual and psychological challenge. How does one remain true to their perception while navigating a world that punishes truth-telling? How does one maintain compassion for those who attack the very insights that could free them? How does one find the wisdom to know when speaking unconscious truths serves healing and when it merely triggers defensive reactions that deepen denial? The social world presents itself as a grand theater where most people have agreed to accept the performance as reality. Deep thinkers, however, cannot help but see the strings, the stagehands, the desperate improvisations behind seemingly confident performances. They perceive the exhausting effort behind casual facades, the fear beneath arrogance, the loneliness within crowds of laughing people. This involuntary ability to see through social masks creates a unique form of existential burden that few understand, and even fewer can bear without profound loneliness. Freud articulated this dynamic when he wrote, "He that has eyes to see and ears to hear may convince himself that no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore." For deep thinkers, this observation becomes a lived reality. They cannot unsee the micro-expressions that contradict spoken words, the body language that reveals hidden intentions, the energy shifts that announce unspoken dynamics. Every social interaction becomes a multi-layered experience where the surface, presentation, and the underlying reality exist in often painful contradiction. This penetrating vision extends beyond individual interactions to entire social systems. Deep thinkers perceive how institutions maintain power through unspoken rules, how social niceties mask systemic violence, how collective agreements to ignore certain realities enable continued dysfunction. They see the emperor's nakedness while everyone else admires non-existent clothes, creating a surreal experience of living in multiple realities simultaneously. The burden intensifies because this perception cannot be turned off. A deep thinker at a social gathering doesn't simply enjoy the party. They simultaneously witness the performance anxiety, the status negotiations, the desperate attempts at connection through hollow interaction. They see the drinking that numbs social anxiety, the laughter that masks discomfort, the small talk that avoids any real contact. What others experience as relaxing social time becomes, for the deep thinker, an exhausting exercise in managing their awareness of what remains unacknowledged. This creates a peculiar form of social isolation. Deep thinkers often find themselves unable to participate authentically in social rituals that require collective pretense. They cannot genuinely laugh at jokes that reinforce harmful stereotypes, cannot engage in gossip that serves to bond through cruelty, cannot participate in conversations that require ignoring obvious elephants in the room. Their inability to know what they know makes them appear antisocial, when in reality they simply cannot force themselves to participate in social dishonesty. The perception of hidden motivations adds another layer to this burden. Deep thinkers often understand why people do what they do better than the actors themselves. They perceive the childhood wounds driving adult behaviors, the unconscious patterns playing out in relationship dynamics, the generational trauma expressing itself through seemingly individual choices. This understanding, while profound, creates a strange dynamic where they must pretend not to see what is glaringly obvious to them, maintaining social harmony by feigning ignorance. The weight of seeing through social masks extends to institutional levels. Deep thinkers perceive how educational systems often crush creativity while claiming to nurture it, how healthcare systems can perpetuate illness while promising healing, how justice systems can institutionalize injustice while maintaining facades of fairness. They see not just individual failures, but systemic patterns designed to maintain dysfunction while presenting images of function. This burden often manifests as a form of anticipatory exhaustion. Before entering any social situation, deep thinkers already feel tired from knowing they will need to navigate multiple levels of reality simultaneously. They must track not only what is being said, but what is being hidden, not only what is happening, but what is being avoided. They must decide moment by moment whether to acknowledge what they perceive or maintain social comfort by pretending blindness. Freud understood that civilization began the first time an angry person cast a word instead of a rock. But for deeper thinkers, civilization often feels like an elaborate agreement to cast neither words nor rocks at obvious problems, instead maintaining a polite silence that allows dysfunction to flourish. They find themselves caught between the violence of truth-telling and the violence of silence, neither option providing genuine peace. The burden becomes particularly acute in intimate relationships. Deep thinkers often see their partner's unconscious patterns, family dynamics, and defensive mechanisms with clarity that would be devastating if fully articulated. They must constantly calibrate how much truth serves growth versus how much overwhelms. They carry the weight of perceptions that could either heal or harm, depending on the readiness of the other to receive them. Yet this burden of seeing through social masks also carries a hidden gift. Deep thinkers develop profound compassion for human struggle, understanding that beneath every mask lies a person trying their best with limited tools. They see not just the deception, but the fear that necessitates it, not just the performance, but the pain it attempts to hide. This depth of perception, while isolating, also opens possibilities for genuine connection with others ready to drop their own masks. The journey from chronic misunderstanding to authentic connection represents one of the most profound transformations available to deep thinkers. After years or even decades of feeling like aliens in their own species, something shifts. The very qualities that created isolation begin to magnetize others who hunger for depth, truth, and genuine understanding. This transformation doesn't require the deep thinker to become less complex or more palatable. Rather, it involves a radical acceptance that their depth, while limiting their circle, exponentially increases its quality. Freud observed that out of your vulnerabilities will come your strength. For deep thinkers, the vulnerability of being perpetually misunderstood eventually transforms into the strength of no longer needing universal understanding. This shift marks the beginning of their journey from isolation to illumination. They stop trying to translate themselves for those who lack the capacity or willingness to comprehend depth, instead conserving their energy for connections that can meet them in the depths. The transformation often begins with a period of profound acceptance. Deep thinkers realize that their initial rejection by mainstream society wasn't a bug, but a feature, a necessary filtering system that prevented them from wasting years in superficial connections. Every person who found them too intense, too complicated, or too philosophical was simply revealing their own limitations, not identifying flaws in the deep thinker. This reframe changes everything, converting rejection from wound to blessing. As deep thinkers embrace their nature rather than apologizing for it, something remarkable happens. They begin to emit a different frequency, one that attracts rather than repels those ready for depth. These connections often feel miraculous after years of isolation. Suddenly, someone understands their references, follows their conceptual leaps, appreciates their nuanced observations. The relief of being genuinely seen and understood after chronic misunderstanding can be overwhelming. Finding their tribe doesn't mean deep thinkers suddenly become social butterflies. Rather, they discover a small but precious circle of individuals who operate at similar depths. These might be other deep thinkers, artists, healers, mystics, or simply individuals who have done enough inner work to appreciate complexity. The connections formed are qualitatively different from mainstream relationships, less frequent, perhaps, but infinitely more nourishing. The illumination aspect of this journey involves recognizing that their years of isolation served a purpose. Like a shamanic initiation, the period of being misunderstood forced them to develop inner resources, self-reliance, and unshakable knowledge of their own truth. They learned to validate their own perceptions when no one else could, to trust their insights despite lack of external confirmation, to find companionship in books, nature, and their own depths when human connection proved impossible. This journey also reveals that many of history's greatest contributors were similarly misunderstood in their time. Freud himself faced ridicule and rejection for ideas now considered foundational. Van Gogh sold only one painting in his lifetime. Galileo was persecuted for his astronomical observations. The deep thinker realizes they're part of a lineage of individuals who saw too clearly for their contemporary comfort, whose gifts required time to be recognized and integrated. The tribe that deep thinkers eventually find often transcends traditional categories. They might connect with someone decades older or younger, from completely different backgrounds, across vast geographical distances. What unites them isn't surface similarities, but depth recognition, the immediate knowing that here is someone who operates in the same psychological depths, who speaks the same unspoken language, who doesn't require extensive translation. These connections often involve a quality of communication that feels telepathic compared to previous interactions. Concepts that required painful explanation with others are grasped instantly. Jokes land that would mystify those operating at surface levels. Silences feel full rather than awkward. The exhaustion of constant translation disappears, replaced by the energizing experience of genuine meeting. The illumination extends beyond personal relationships to purpose and contribution. Deep thinkers often discover that their painful years of seeing what others couldn't see have prepared them for specific forms of service. They might become therapists who can hold space for complex trauma, writers who articulate ineffable experiences, teachers who can reach gifted but misunderstood students, or innovators who solve problems others can't even perceive. Freud noted, in that love and work are the cornerstones of our humanness. For deep thinkers who find their tribe and purpose, both love and work transform. Love becomes not just personal, but transpersonal. A love for truth, for depth, for the human journey toward consciousness. Work becomes not just labor, but contribution, using their hard-won understanding to ease the path for others navigating. Similar depths. The journey from isolation to illumination doesn't end with finding one's tribe. Rather, it becomes an ongoing spiral of deepening connection and expanding contribution. Each authentic connection makes the next one more possible. Each person who understands them gives them more courage to express their truth fully. The very qualities that once isolated them become bridges to profound connection and meaningful impact. This transformation reveals the ultimate truth. Deep thinkers were never meant to be understood by everyone. They were meant to be understanding itself, embodied in human form, creating spaces where depth is welcomed and truth is honored. Their journey from isolation to illumination lights the way for others traveling similar paths, proving that the curse of depth transforms into the gift of genuine connection for those brave enough to stay true to their nature. If this video spoke to the deep thinker in you and helped you feel less alone in your complexity, please give it a like. Your engagement helps us reach other profound minds who need to know they're not broken. They're just operating at depths most people can't fathom. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell to join a community that celebrates depth over superficiality. Each week, we explore the psychological insights that validate your complex way of experiencing the world. Share this video with that one person who truly gets you, or with someone struggling with being chronically misunderstood. Sometimes a single video can change someone's entire perspective on their supposed flaws.